What's going on, guys? Just a second to get the other chat up and running. All right, I believe we are live. Good to be back, you guys. I just finished up a retreat, private retreat, 10 days, lots of magic. It's always an amazing thing to witness people become themselves with these medicines. And so I pulled you guys, hold on, it says no data. Is that true? I pulled you guys to see what you would be interested in me streaming about for my comeback after 10 days. And the techniques of shamanism was the choice. Hold on, let me wash this down. Coca paste. And, you know, it's an incredibly deep and weird subject. And what shamanism really even is, you know, what the proper definition and who should be entitled to use this title. You know, all these things are subject to debate. And the reality is that there are shamanic traditions all over the world that basically employ the same techniques to achieve their ends. So song, drumming, psychoactive plants, various ways of getting into trances. There are even in India a certain style of shaman that has the wife feeds him hot peppers until he goes into like a delirium, like a fever tremor, or a fever delirium. So he's having visions. There are tabaqueros that drink tobacco juice to have visions. There is the ayahuasca shaman, the Huachumero, the San Pedro shaman. And it's lesser known, but a true fact, that the Western mysteries themselves were a shamanic tradition. The kaikion, the secret beverage that was drinking by the inner circle, by the inner circle at the Eleusinian mysteries, contains some sort of psychoactive brew that I think was probably acacia in Syria. And for the shaman, at least, and for the initiate in the Western mysteries, the goal is twofold mostly: to know thyself and to learn to read the allegories of the book of nature. Albert Pike wrote in Morals and Dogma, the true scripture is writ large upon the land for those who can see it. And so this dialogue is developed through various means. And it gives the shaman access to what seem to be supernatural powers. And they are not psychosomatic, and they are effective within certain boundaries. The shaman is able to intuitively diagnose in a lot of cases. The shaman cannot be lied to. The shaman sees into the being of other people. And in this way, he's often able to effect cures that elude modern medicine. And I'll tell some of those stories from my own life. And this isn't necessarily pertaining only to, you know, icaros and energy and intuition. Also having a encyclopedic knowledge of healing plants is generally part of the protocol of shamanism. And so, let me get this rape out of my nose. And so, this is going to be a series. Tonight we're going to talk mostly about the healing techniques, the plants, and it's not so much the songs, but the way in which vibrations can be used to manipulate and manage energy. Vibration in song also can transfer higher states of consciousness in my experience, from the musicians to the audience. There's a certain collective entrainment that occurs, and there are certain bands who, their undercover objective really is this gnosis-inducing effect that the music can have. So first, I'll explain a little bit about how I got involved in all of this in the first place. It was just the chance introduction of a book called Flowering Plants into the elementary school library. I became fascinated with that, and also over the years, mystical traditions from around the world. Studied the mysteries a lot via mostly Joseph Campbell, and Jungian psychology, and all of these things that seem to me intrinsically interrelated to this pursuit of gnosis, really. For me, it's not just about plant medicine. It's not about one tradition of shamanism. It is about the expansion of consciousness and revelation of hidden things, through these pursuits of altered states and study of the sciences and whatnot. And so eventually, that led me to South America. And I never intended to become a shaman or a facilitator or work with ayahuasca. I did not pay for an apprenticeship. I just started drinking with a guy that noticed that I was helping people that had drank much more than me, and other signs. And one day he said, "You're becoming a shaman and you must do all this stuff." And he just kind of took me under his wing. And I was very hesitant, not because I didn't want to drink a lot of ayahuasca because of the experience, but I hated the body load of DMT and the feeling of the transition so much that I remember one night I drank medicine and I was thinking, I just cannot stand the way this feels. And the medicine says to me, that's too bad, because you're going to be doing this an awful lot over the coming decade. And that turned out to be true. And so I'm also not a big fan of the idea that you have to take a lineage and then remain with that lineage exclusively. For me, the syncretic approach is best, that we should be drawing on every possible useful influence that we can find, while at least maintaining an awareness of where these things came from. So I was taught mostly in the Shuar way. And when it comes to ceremony, I generally observe all the practices and protocol of the Shuar. And anything that I introduce that is not consistent with that, I always designate it as such. Whenever I do anything in ceremony, I tell people where this came from, why I'm doing it. I think it's really important that people understand rather than just experience. Something that has been hindered by the almost universal practice of secrecy. In the Eleusinian mystery schools, secrecy was an imperative. Rapé makers, in the Brazilian tribes, keep their recipes secret. And many shamanic practices also, I've definitely, a few things I've been taught, I was sworn to silence, including in North America from a peyote roadman named Nighthorse, who was quite the character. But yeah, this secrecy. And one of the things that we're seeing is that even in the Western mysteries, a lot of people feel that the time for secrecy has passed and that it should all be open. And I worked with Huni Kuin Pahe a while ago making rapé, and they were saying that they have collectively decided to change the rule about teaching outsiders because everyone needs this medicine, everyone should have access to it, and it's important that it's preserved by spreading it. Another thing that really helped me in terms of learning the medicinal plants is a kind of a sad fact that at least in the Quechua communities where I lived in the jungle in Ecuador, a lot of the kids have lost interest. And so the old timers would actually see me looking at plants and come up and start telling me stuff. Whereas up until, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, they were very reticent to talk to outsiders about this. So there's a very dramatic shift in terms of openness about these things. And so, I spent some time with the first teacher, and then I ended up meeting his teacher and working with him a little bit. Miguel Chiriop, a Shuar shaman who sings the most otherworldly icaros that you will ever hear. It's nothing like the Shipibo style, which tends to be more bright and warm and even bluesy. I've heard truly extraordinary in terms of melody, and just really technical, incredibly beautiful Shipibo songs. But the Shuar way is the most almost unsettlingly like interdimensional sounding. Tremendous experience even to witness that. And then Kofan, who have a very different style as well when it comes to icaros. There are songs, but there's also this like really fast babbling chant that is used a lot by the shamans in ceremony. And then the Quichua. Some of you actually came with me to work with Mama Celia a little bit when you visited the retreats. By the way, we have one spot open for September. We're doing November, which will feature morel hunting in the Andes, and we're planning for Manu back in the Amazon in May. So if you want to come for September, you have only a few days to book because I have to close it up. And so now that we have gotten all that aside, it's really difficult to think of where to start, but let's start at the fundamentals. And one of the ways that I connect dots is to look for things that are ubiquitous, especially in disparate cultures that have had no contact, unless history is a big fat lie, but ostensibly have had no contact. And so the first thing that comes to mind is the circle. And the circle represents the same thing in every single tradition. Druid, Western mysteries, South American shamanism, North American peyote roadman, always a circle is cast. And the circle either represents the microcosm that the magician or shaman is the god of, really, or you could think of it just as an area. But in the Western mystery tradition, which is my primary association, I guess, it's a literal universe that you are the god of. And so the shaman, medicine man, druid, whatever it is, manages the energy within the circle, and the perimeter of the circle determines, what has to remain outside of this magician's universe. And so ayahuasca has an interesting take on this. We're kind of getting out of order a little bit, but at least in the Shuar way, one of the jobs of the shaman is to absorb all of the negative energy and the toxic stuff that is emanating from the group, and then go and vomit violently almost. I call it jaguar vomiting because there's this crazy growling. It's just a wild thing to hear and to do also. But just wanted to mention that way, that version of managing this energy. And then almost invariably, the four directions are acknowledged. And the four directions actually symbolize a lot of other stuff, or at least these acknowledgments, because it's also, depending on the tradition, the four directions, the four archangels, the four fundamental forces of physics. And the reason four is the number is that four is the number of stability. So first you define the void that is the perimeter of this universe, and then you give it stability and structure so you can actually make a functional environment out of it. And it's really beautiful to observe all these different traditions, because the four fundamental forces of physics aligning with this concept as the fundamental structure, the thing that allows you to build upon the void. It's just really an incredible thing that all of this stuff aligns. And so, that is the most universal aspect of any kind of ritual work, that there's a circle, the energy is managed by the shaman, and 4 points are either acknowledged or established to create stability, and then you can move forward with the ritual work. Let me look at the other chat and see if we have any questions. Or, by the way, guys, AMA is always open. You can ask anything, and I'll do my best to answer. So having established this circle, the management of the energy can begin, and that is the fundamental structure of the ritual, I guess. And then we should talk also about the strategies that are employed and the incredible weirdness of the efficacy of some of them. The idea of managing energy to a lot of people reasonably seems kind of crazy, you know. One of the techniques that I was taught, for example, is to look at you could call it an aura. I don't think that's quite right. An energy grid. When you drink ayahuasca and you look at someone, you can see this lattice work of energy. And there will be spots in it that look almost like they're rotten and they're black and they're not symmetrical. They're out of, you know, they're all gnarled up and dark. And there are different ways that you can bring that net of being back into alignment. One of the most interesting ones that I was taught the first time that I drank ayahuasca alone was to make 2 pitches come out of my mouth simultaneously, something that I'm not good at doing without the medicine. That's another aspect of this that we'll get into. You have muscles in your body, in your throat in particular, that you do not know exist until ayahuasca teaches you how to use them. It was an extremely unexpected and bizarre experience when the medicine started using my throat, like positioning stuff by using muscles that not only would I not have been able to control myself, I didn't even know you had them to move. And there's all sorts of different sounds that come from this manipulation of your frame by this medicine. So anyways, in this particular case, it showed me how to make the 2 pitches, and they're a little bit out of phase, so there's a little bit of dissonance. And then after making, you kind of push it to the most dissonant interval that you can, and then bring it back into perfect unison. And you can watch the disordered parts of this net actually start to clean up and the wounds heal. And usually the person, if this is directed at an individual, will run out of the teepee and go and vomit because you have pushed something through their being and now it has to be expelled. And we will definitely get into explanations of why the purge is so necessary. How exactly it works, I'm not sure. I don't think anyone is. But, you know, we'll talk about it. I have ideas, I guess. And so, you know, that is a huge element of this, to use sound to influence energetic states. That's really the only way I can explain it. And then the icaro is actually an interesting subject because icaro is a Quechua word that means healing through smoke. And it originally referred to this process, like when you harvest a plant, you will blow the tobacco smoke on the wound as a sort of blessing, but also the idea is that things work on the energetic level the same way that they do in the physical world, because they're not actually 2 different worlds. This is something a lot of people don't realize about a lot of these indigenous traditions. They don't actually believe in 2 separate worlds for spirit world, and it's all here and it's all now, and some elements of it are only visible under certain circumstances, you know, but it's not really 2 worlds. And so if you put tobacco on plants, it will kill bugs. It's a great insecticide, right? So if you blow the smoke on the wound of a tree, you are disinfecting it. So that's part of the gesture with this, that tobacco cleans energetically and physically. Mapacho is often blown all over people when they, you know, before a combo ceremony or for various cleanses. And that's the rationale behind it. So, where exactly was I? Oh, the icaro, the sople. But it's come to refer to any song that is sung during an ayahuasca or San Pedro or Campo ceremony, basically. And there are all sorts of different icaros for all sorts of different purposes. Some of them are meant to heal specific illnesses. Some of them are meant to invoke certain spirits. Along those lines, I actually have a pretty interesting illustration. I was in Iquitos for the first time a little less than a year ago, and we had no money. What's going on, Austin? We had no money, so I was standing in the Shipibo market thinking it would really be great if we could find one of these masters, Shipibo masters, to drink with us for free, but I doubt that's going to happen. The second the only guy that knew my name and spoke English that I knew there walked up beside me, and he's like, "Hey, how you doing? See that lady over there? She's they have not hierarchical, but like a degreed system, like the mysteries, and she was the top degree, and so." He said, "Would you like to meet her?" And I went over to meet her and talked to her for just 1 minute or something. And she invites us to her house to drink ayahuasca with her. So that was pretty remarkable. And that's the kind of thing that if you use these medicines the right way and you have a capacity for it, those kind of experiences will increase dramatically. And even stranger ones. This is one of the reasons I think a lot of people that took psychedelics in the 60s didn't have a lot of education. They would experience stuff like this and think they broke their brain with the psychedelics, when in reality, it's more accurate to say that people don't think things all the way through. They know that they have this intuitive impulse to expand their consciousness, but they're not expecting their reality to actually, the perimeters of what the perimeters is fine too, of what is available to them to experience change. But don't worry, you haven't broken your brain. It's just that there, are levels of consciousness that dictate certain kinds of experiences that are not normal. So anyways, we go to her house and drink ayahuasca with her. And I'm sitting up, and I have my eyes closed, and she starts to sing an icaro, and these octopus-looking spirit beings, like dozens of them, come floating over, and they're dripping their tentacles into me, and some of them are black, and I thought that meant that they were like toxic, and so I was kind of concerned about some of them. And I'd seen them before, but they had never attached themselves to be like this. And so I'm paying attention to this, and I suddenly realized that this maestra is sitting right in front of me. And she's singing with so much passion, and her face is red, and her gestures are dramatic. And even though she's singing in Shipibo, the gestures are so expressive that I feel like I know exactly what she's saying. I could understand the conversation. Also, ayahuasca makes you telepathic. It's not a drug-induced delusion. It is 100% real. Psilocybin also, the first time I really experienced this was with psilocybin. And the explanation is actually pretty simple. Our nervous system filters out a lot of the information, most of the information, 99% of it almost, in order to make it manageable for us. And psychedelics bring down those filters, and then we get bleed through from other people's brains. While we're on the subject, actually, the fact that entanglement has presented evidence that consciousness is being generated by entangled biphoton particles in the brain, that also helps us to understand how these things would happen, because particles in your brain are entangled with particles in other people's brains and in everything in the universe. So just an interesting side note there, that we're actually starting to have a scientific basis where, the muggles and the normies no longer really have grounds to say, all these things are woo, they're not possible, because we have a mechanistic basis for it. So where was I going with the with the telepathy aspect of this? Oh, yeah. So she comes and she's singing the song, and these things start to like blow away, kind of like they wrap up their business and they're gone. And as she's singing the song, they're increasingly absent. And then the sky opens up and it's like crystal clear, beautiful, clouds everywhere, and like these rows of angels with hearts, like Cupid or something. And I felt so clean and pure and relieved of all of this stuff. It was like sitting in front of a hurricane of positive energy. And the interview is actually on the channel somewhere. You guys can look it up if you like. Is our audio okay? Why do we keep losing folks as soon as let me check. Let me know if there's clipping, because if there is, I can fix it. Yeah. So I asked her later what those things were, or if she knew what they were, and she said, "Yeah, I called them. They were just here to clean you." And I asked her about the dark ones and whether they had bad intentions, or, and she said, no, they're just cleaning the worst of it. And yeah, so that is the kind of thing that icaros are designed to do. And the experience of feeling cleaned internally, spiritually, and energetically was mind-blowing. I mean, there are no words. And I actually can put you in contact with this woman, Maestra Juanita, if anyone would like to go and see her. She's absolutely incredible. And so that's the story of the icaro. But, I also like to offer modern context for some of this stuff. And, it might sound silly to people that are outsiders in this scene, but the Grateful Dead really did the same thing. And Jerry Garcia, I think, the reason he aged so fast wasn't just cigarettes and, cocaine and all. He was on a lot of drugs. But it was also that he was acting as a shaman and absorbing the, negativity and the trauma and pain of like 100,000 people a night for 30 years. And he just, he looked 90 when he died. He was 53. But that's really what they were known for connecting people with a certain level of consciousness. And when I first noticed that it was a real thing, it was because I noticed that their lyrics did not contain the message that the audience obviously got, that it was some sort of, subconscious transmission. Another interesting element of it is that it would only really happen when they were improvising for prolonged periods, because they said that they had to get into something equivalent to a meditative trance. And when this energy that changed consciousness exploded out of the band, the music would always do something almost supernatural. It's difficult to explain without witnessing it. But yeah, this burst of gnosis-inducing music was always accompanied by some sort of completely incredible improvisation that sounded like it had been written and rehearsed and somehow executed by 7 people that are improvising. Really a remarkable thing. And so I set out as a 21-year-old kid to try to figure out if I could do the same thing. And of course, part of me thought it was very silly fantasy, and that there's no way that this is real even. And eventually I was leaving a club with our bass player, and a girl came up and told us, described what I just described to you, and said that that's what we were doing. And so the point is that beyond icaros summoning spirits or healing illnesses or whatever it is that particular icaro is just designed to do, if the shaman has truly elevated his consciousness, he is going to be able to share that, to entrain the people that are in his ceremony to whatever extent they're capable of receiving. And it's not It's not so extreme that if the Buddha sings you a song, you're going to just achieve enlightenment on the spot. But it is a real thing that happens incrementally. This is why it's so important also to make sure that your shaman really has good intentions. And this is actually trickier than people even realize, because the shaman may even have himself convinced that he has good intentions and be completely deranged. And when you're in this state of receptivity, psychically, emotionally, spiritually, you're not just going to entrain with the higher parts. You are absorbing everything that is being transmitted around you during this period. So, choosing a shaman is a very, very important task. That just led to another thought that has escaped me again. Probably something about entrainment, but here, let me check the chat. And where in Peru is Juanita? Iquitos? Yes, she's in Iquitos. Okay, so we were talking about the fact that the level of illumination and the purity of your shaman, is going to create a connection that is very valuable and has to be protected. But actually, the next thought that led me to was that this is one of the reasons why public ceremonies or ceremonies that are just commercially open to whoever signs up, especially if they're very large, I don't know how I feel about that. In the old days, traditionally, only the shaman drank ayahuasca. And there were exceptions and there were tribes that drank collectively, but the general practice was that the shaman drank the ayahuasca and then he, has a connection with you and can see your energetic grid and all this stuff and figures out what needs to happen for you, hopefully. But when you have a group of 50, 60, 30 people, complete strangers, you have no idea who these people are or what kind of stuff they're carrying. And earlier on, when I was holding ceremony, on several occasions, I found out that there was someone present that had something like seriously sketchy going on. So that's another thing about this whole ayahuasca industry situation. The whole what it's based on is maybe fundamentally flawed. Our retreats, actually, we have almost 90% or something are return guests that I have worked with, most of them for an entire month. So, in our situation, we actually do know who's present. I know them better than anyone knows them in a couple of cases, very deeply. And so, that's a real blessing for us to be able to do that, because it also, I know what plants they need. I know what dosage is perfect. You know what I mean? It's a really good situation to be in, to really know the people that are present. And to take that further, in a traditional setting, the shaman would have grown up with you. He would probably knew your parents, maybe your grandparents as well. He knows all of the traumas that occurred to them and to you. You know what I mean? So he's much better able to assist. And for me, there's way more to it than just drinking medicine with people. I spend a lot of time getting to know people and having the best understanding I can of their influences and traumas. And I think that's really important. And I have mixed feelings about ayahuasca industry, because it helps a lot of people, but the format maybe is off, and there's not really anything we can do about it. So, in other news, we're talking a little bit about the song and the function of the vibrations. Well, there's another interesting aspect of this that I still don't fully understand very well. I know that it works. I've done it, and I have watched my teachers do it, and it involves, in our tradition, it was suripanga. I don't know if the Shipibo have another name, but suripanga, it's a small palm, and it's used as a limpieza to absorb the energy. And it's something that you understand better if you have taken the medicine and heard it, because it somehow makes perfect sense that it would do what it's supposed to do. Without experiencing that, it's pretty hard to conceptualize, I would imagine. And the other practice is to take some agua florida, some flower water, and sometimes it contains tobacco. There are different variations. But the flower water is taken into the mouth and then spit and sprayed on the limpieza, and the limpieza goes forward and shakes some of the liquid onto the patient or the attendee. And this limpieza, to the Western mind, it seems ridiculous to think you shake some leaves at someone and it does anything at all. Chacapa. I don't know if that's a name for the plant, though. Isn't that a name for the shaker? I think it just means shaker or something. But yeah, that is one of the names for sure. I recognize it. Chacapa. And then there's something that sounds similar also. But anyways, I'll just give you an example of one of the most extreme things that I've seen with this. And it really, making rational sense of it is difficult. I understand the mechanism of it, that the liquid is a carrier to bring the intent to calm you and to protect you from the shaman to you. And there is another element of it that is being lost because it's kind of gross and weird. And but I can't remember what it's called. But there's a transmission of a bodily fluid that supposedly can only be generated by a very highly advanced shaman. And they spit either in their hand and feed it to the initiate or spit it directly into their mouth. And this substance is what is supposed to convey the ability to spray and affect a person and their energy in this way. And I don't think most people have had this from someone that really legitimately has the lineage. Regardless of that, though, it still seems to work. And the example that I was going to give, I brought a girl with me to my teacher's ceremony, one of them, and as soon as the medicine became strong, she started screaming bloody murder. And he almost instantly, limpieza, and she stops screaming as soon as the first drop hits her, completely calm, and then he grabs her and pushes her face first out the tent just in time for her to vomit, 10 gallons of vomit, a massive purge. I've done this for people now, and I've seen it many times. The official explanation that the water becomes a carrier for the intent of the shaman is probably the best we're going to do on that particular subject. There are other versions of this, though, that actually involve plants. And this also allows me to illustrate how the medicine sometimes can tell you what plant you need. And I've proven that it's true because of the results that were obtained. The first time it happened to me, actually, it was very early in my ayahuasca drinking days, but the year before I'd gotten lost in the mountains in November in Northern California. It was freezing. I was out there for 3 nights and 4 days or something. And I was drinking out of leaves and I think a spring at one point. And so I drank this ayahuasca. I had terrible stomach problems, like, chronic diarrhea and all this sort of stuff. And I'm laying on this deck in the jungle, and the visions are all nonsense, and they had been pretty much since the beginning, without exception. This is probably only my third or fourth ceremony. And I complained. I was like, I'm tired of all this gibberish. I don't know what it means, and the medicine says, here, I'll give you something you can use then. And suddenly I'm looking at this geisha alien kind of looking entity, and she goes like this, and these green, like bright, glowing green characters that looked maybe Asian, but like if Asians were aliens or something, and they float out of her chest, and she's like, here. And I was like, that's really cool and all, but how am I going to use that? And she said, you will use it to make sounds. Later, I would discover that exactly in the way that the Hebrew, the Kabbalistic version, at least, of the creation, where these mother letters, 3 at first, the 3 elements, which also the Shuar and other indigenous groups here have 3 elements, that these sounds had created the universe. And once there were 3, they were able to connect in different configurations, which created 22 letters. And these 22 vibrations, basically, the word, the logos that created the universe. The Shuar have the same belief. And my suspicion now is that those characters represented each of these syllables, I guess you could call them, the sounds that are strung together. They're not words, but they're just the sounds that the Shuar believe created the universe, basically. I can't prove it, but I think that's what those symbols were. But I still said, that's really cool, but what am I going to do with that? She said, well, you'll make music, but I was not really satisfied with this still. And after I think that, this black being, not black as in African-American black, but actually coated in some kind of exoskeleton that was black, almost looked like Darth Vader or something, comes walking around from behind this wall, super slow and with these like insanely confident movements. And it was a sort of really slow dance. And every once in a while, he would throw a little bit of extra snaz into it and do it like a little extra fancy wiggle. And every time he did that, all of the cicadas in the trees would lose their minds, like they're cheering. And I'm like, what is this, like a cricket god or something? I mean, that's cool, but I still don't feel like you're giving me anything I can use. And she goes, okay, how about this? And I look down because there's this yellow light going past my face, and I suddenly can see into my organs. And there are all these little yellow bugs. And she had magnified them so I could see them really well. And I was like, parasites? And she's like, yeah, it's so bad that you could die. Remember when you got lost in the jungle? You got these parasites. So go into the jungle, and I will show you which plant to use to kill them. This is where the story kind of takes a anticlimactic turn, although, we'll get to something that substantiates this. It was very early in my, ayahuasca drinking experiences. It was my first time in the Amazon rainforest, and it was like 2:30 in the morning. And I was like, I am not going to go out in the jungle and pick some plant and eat it because a voice in my head told me to. I'm not going to do it. Now I wish I had gone in and at least harvested the plant and then identified it later. That would have been the smart thing to do. But then I tell the shaman about this, and he's, impressed. He's like, if the medicine is talking to you this way, that's a very important sign. And it's true that the Shuar, for example, will drink ayahuasca, the shaman, and then he'll go, if someone has a snake bite or whatever malady, and he'll go and look, and the ayahuasca will turn the plant into a snake, the type of snake that bit the person, and he knows that's the antidote, or whatever it is. The plant will take the form of some animal or symbol that tells him that that's the correct plant. And so, this is a little bit unrelated, but it's worth mentioning. The medicine makes you vomit, right? So a couple days after the ayahuasca showed me these parasites in my stomach, I went to another ceremony with the same shaman, and we were doing a purge where you just drink guayusa, bowl after bowl, and vomit. For the Shuar, the vomiting is everything. The visions really aren't even that important. The natam that they make is 8 different plants, and it's kind of greenish yellow, and it tastes completely different from ayahuasca. And it's engineered more for a good purge than it is for visions. You actually have to drink quite a bit of it to have visions, and you're going to be quite sick. So I'm drinking to do this purge, all of this guayusa, and ayahuasca had actually told me I can flush the bugs, but I cannot kill their eggs, and that's why she wanted me to eat this plant. So the next ceremony, I'm drinking, trying to purge. All of it is going right through me, right as fast as I could drink it, just right out the other end. And I remembered her saying, I can flush the bugs, but I cannot kill their eggs. And here I am desperately trying to vomit to purge, and the medicine is making all of the guayusa just run right through me in order to flush the parasites. And so I did a parasite cleanse, and it did resolve the issue to a large extent. Let's see, what was the... Okay, and another really interesting example of this, I had a client who's actually coming back for September. He was with me for a full month, and he had almost no visions the entire month. And it wasn't the medicine, because there were other people, including myself, and there was plenty of chaliponga, which is the plant that we use in Ecuador in the place of chacruna. I still prefer it, actually, to chacruna. But so he had no visions, vomiting all the time, no visions. And so the last night, this is his last chance. He's leaving, I think, the next day. Last chance to have visions. So 5 hours have gone by. So the medicine should be completely out of his system. So I'd pretty much given up. But then I hear the voice of the medicine, Pachamama, if you will, say he has an energetic block that can be removed with red ortiga. So go cut some red ortiga and ask him to take off his shirt and blow the agua florida and give him a thorough lashing with this stinging plant. Oh, right on. Terapoto in the house. So it tells me to do this. I've never heard of it. I know red ortiga, and I know that the Quechua use it for bone pain and a few other things. But I'd never heard anything like this. So I go over to the stand of red ortiga, and I cut it, and I bring it over and give him the cleansing. And he sits back down, and I'm thinking he's probably just going to sit here for a few more minutes, and then we're done. So I went into the kitchen to start putting stuff away and, just doing my nightly drill, getting started on the cleanup. And I go back out, and he's sprawled out on the concrete, not even on his mat. And I can tell right away. I was like, you're having visions, aren't you? And he's like, oh, my God. And so none of this makes sense. The ayahuasca is consumed 5 hours ago. It shouldn't be capable of hitting him full force. But I was told, and I didn't tell him why I was doing it either. So it's not like I set him up psychologically. I just went, cut the plant, did what I was told, visions within 5 minutes. So, that's just an example of how these medicines are used to heal. They're really a conduit for information and a way for us to tap into each other's subconscious directly. And that's really where this information, I think, is coming from. And after a while, you get to the point where you can just intuit these things. You know what plants it is that people need, and it's just instinct. And then also, most of us, including myself, have learned a lot about the ally plants. People call them admixture plants, but not all of them are taken with ayahuasca, so they're not really admixture. But ajo sacha, for example, I had a very strong feeling about a guy that had come that had epilepsy, and he stopped taking his medication, which is supposed to cause more seizures. He had 2 in 48 hours while he was still on the medication. So he quits, starts drinking ajo sacha, and does not have another seizure for 9 months. And the only reason he had another seizure is that he relapsed on methamphetamine. And I told him that if he did that, that the epilepsy would return. So, long story short, this information that we receive in regards to these plants, from these plants, so far, in my experience at least, it's always true. They will also tell you behaviors, not just behavioral changes. But one of the things that the teacher told me that I did not want to do because it was just too weird, and I thought maybe he had, gone a little batty or something. But I have chronic fatigue syndrome, IBS, that sort of thing, different manifestations of it at different times. It's gotten a lot better with the plant medicine. Actually, for those of you that suffer from this, I went on the carnivore diet for a month, and it fixed it most of the way. What the plants hadn't quite accomplished. But he told me that my stomach problems were related to my relationship with my mother, which was absolutely horrendous, for sure. And so one night he comes and kneels beside me, and he says, "I've been outside meditating with the medicine, and she told me that your stomach is because of your mother, and you should go and find a woman who's lactating, and even if you have to pay her, just breastfeed. Do this, 15 minutes twice a week for a month." And I was like, no, dude, no. I'm not, different cultures, you know what I mean? I'm not doing that. But then it hit me a little while later. My mom didn't breastfeed me. So as crazy as it sounds, he was probably right that just making the symbolic, weird but symbolic gesture would have healed some deeply traumatized part of me. Yeah. So just another example of that sort of intuitive insight, that can be provided by the plants and a good shaman. While we're on the subject, I guess, of intuition, I was going to save this for part 2, but we'll talk about it more then. But this intuition, this telepathic connection, most of you probably know that the Harmala alkaloids were called telepamine and telepathine instead of harmaline and tetrahydroharmaline. There's more, but whatever the main 2 constituents are, they were telepamine and telepathine up until I think the mid-1960s. Yeah, whoever's talking about how we shouldn't eat meat, I strongly disagree. I suffered for 20 years, and until I went on carnivore for a month, I had little relief. I mean, ayahuasca would fix it for a period, and chewing coca actually also really helps with any digestive disorder. So I could make it better, but it wasn't until I went on carnivore for a month that it was almost completely gone. And the idea that we shouldn't eat animals because they're sentient is completely ridiculous in light of the fact that research has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that Venus flytraps, for example, can count on 2 different number lines. And it is no coincidence that the most sophisticated intellect of any known plant is a meat eater. So the idea that there's some correspondence between being an evolved person and not eating meat is disproven by a plant, which is hilarious. But not only that, they feel pain. Some of them know what color shirt you're wearing. They can recognize relatives. Trees have empathy. They will send nutrients and mobilize bacteria and minerals to, particularly to their relatives, their cousins, and some of them have memory. The touch-me-not. If you touch a touch-me-not for a week without damaging it, it'll stop closing because it remembers that it's not dangerous. So, there are plants there. Oh, and the single-celled slime mold that out-engineered engineers, they're more sentient than cows. So, if you're vegan because you feel like it's a health thing, then more power to you, although I disagree. I think all extreme diets, vegan, may serve a purpose for certain types of illnesses, for preparing to become a shaman. In a lot of traditions, abstaining from meat for a period of 2 or 3 years is, in the Shuar way, actually no meat, no sex, no alcohol, pretty monk-like for 2 full years. But yeah, these extreme diets are good for short-term fixing stuff, but I would not remain on the carnivore diet for years, nor would I be a vegan for years. And it's interesting, and I don't know if it's because of the diet, but vegans actually have an exponentially higher instance of mental illness than the rest of the population, like much, much higher than the median. So, not really so much a fan. And what I was going to talk about, though, is the depths of this telepathy that occurs, and how it actually will persist without ayahuasca after a while. My teacher, for example, has consumed an incredible amount of ayahuasca. Most weeks, say 3 out of 4 weeks in the month, he'll have ceremony usually. Some breaks. So he's drinking 3 or 4 times a night for 10 years. And there are certain Shuar, like observations, certain times of the year, like I guess the equivalent of a holiday or something, where tremendous amounts of ayahuasca are consumed every day for long periods of time. One initiation is actually a full lunar cycle, so 28 days. And it's brutal. I did the 3-day version, and you get almost no sleep, you fast, barely any water, and you get maybe an hour or 2 of sleep, wake you back up, little sip of ayahuasca to connect you with the jungle, and then you're trekking through the jungle. And in Gualaquiza, where they live, it's mountainous jungle, but it rains all the time, so it's 2 feet of mud. So you're just slogging through this. I actually stepped in quicksand and disappeared up to my waist in a datura forest, a brumansia forest. Incredible thing to see. It was Toei, or Floripondia, angel trumpet, beautiful and kind of sinister looking flower. And somehow they had taken over this huge, maybe 500 meters long, just a forest of nothing but brumansia. It was an incredible thing to walk through. At any rate, though, drinking a tremendous amount of ayahuasca. And not only does he not have bad teeth from vomiting multiple times every night, because ayahuasca neutralizes the stomach acids, is my guess. I know it's very alkaline. And so, unlike a bulimic, the teeth are not damaged in these shaman that are vomiting constantly. But the point that I was really getting at is that you retain this telepathy, even outside of the ayahuasca ceremony. The first time that I experienced it with him, I had just met my partner, and I didn't even know her name, so I thought of her as the German girl. And the first time I saw her was the day after ceremony, and this voice in my head said, "She will have your babies. Our son is now almost 5, and in the other room." And I had no romantic interest, feelings. I totally just shrugged it off, like that's ridiculous, and just went to go get my sandwich. And then for the next 2 weeks, every time I went out, I looked beside me, there she is somehow. It was absolutely remarkable. And so I had this thought, and I get on the bus to go to the jungle with this shaman, and I have this thought about seeing my partner and thinking, "She will have my babies," was the first thought I had. And I didn't want a family or anything. I never planned to have kids. And as I think this, the shaman looks over at me and he says, "The first time I saw my partner, the medicine told me she will have your babies." And I'm just like, bug-eyed, but this is just once. So I think I can maybe write it off, as a remarkable coincidence. But no. Over the years, over and over again, in and out of ceremony, whatever you're thinking about, he'll just start talking to you about it. I've been told I do the same thing. And I think anyone that drinks enough ayahuasca does. And it's not really conscious or deliberate. It just pops into your head and you should say it. But you're not, at least I'm not, and I don't think he was consciously thinking about this telepathy. But I'll give you guys one or two other really insane examples of this. Later that night, in the jungle, I was sitting with my eyes closed, and I didn't even know he was there because I was so absorbed in my visions and my thinking. And I was thinking I should invite the German girl to tea. And I look over, and the shaman says, the German girl, invite her to tea, but down by the river. And I was like, damn, man, that was twice in one day. So a couple nights later, I had an experience where I was seeing through my forehead, like my pineal gland had been activated to the extent that I could use it, and it looked kind of orangish red. Everything was like through this film that I assume was like blood and forehead, in the way. But I tested it, I tracked my hands in front of my face. I got up and walked around with my eyes closed, and everything was exactly where I could see, feeling. And I thought, man, that's just, it's crazy if my brain could actually have recorded all that, and I'm just remembering it, I have to be seeing through my forehead right now. It was precipitated by a mosquito coming to land, and I saw the mosquito coming, but then when it landed and bit me, it hit me that it was real. So the next morning I go down to get breakfast, and the shaman doesn't say good morning or how was your experience last night. He just looks at me and he says, sometimes you can see through your forehead when you drink the medicine. So at this point, I'm thinking, okay, that there's no way that this is anything but actual telepathy. So I go home and I check, and the pineal gland is actually connected to the neovisual cortex and does have rods and cones. So the connection of the third eye with the sixth sense, which is also a thing with certain tribes here in South America, they knew about this too. But the connection with the third eye and sixth sense, and the fact that DMT actually activates the eyeball, the eye atop the pyramid, the all-seeing eye, physically, and then you have these telepathy experiences around it. I mean, it's pretty clear what that's all about. Some other little nugget popped into my head a second ago. I hope I can recall it. Yeah, okay, we did those three. Yeah, I thought I had another really remarkable telepathy story in conjunction with this, but maybe it'll come back to me. So, and then some of the other stuff, I don't really feel it's necessary to really get too deep into the stuff that everyone knows. Repetitive drumming sounds help to create a trance, and my way of thinking about these trance states, psychedelic states, whatever it is, it's just a matter of suspending the filter in your being. And so it doesn't really matter, in a way, how you do it, because the transcendental experience, to me, is an experience of the holistic consciousness, the greater consciousness to some degree or other. The utility of having different practices and different techniques for entering into this state, I think, even though there's so much overlap, is that, in my experience, different psychedelics bring down different frequency, or a different swath of the spectrum that's being filtered, and of course the dose as well. But for example, bufotenine seems to completely short circuit, so you have an experience of the ultimate reality, the pure consciousness with zero filter. And then DMT removes more of the filter than, say, LSD, unless you take a huge dose. And you'll also notice that these medicines offer different superpowers. LSD actually has the greatest efficacy for catalyzing neurogenesis and enhancing neuroplasticity in the brain, more than psilocybin, DMT, any of the rest. So for increasing your capacity to learn, if you play an instrument and you're trying to get better at improvising, as long as the dose is manageable, there's nothing like playing an instrument on LSD in terms of, making years worth of practice gains in 2 hours. I also used it to quit smoking cigarettes after smoking since I was 9, and I think I was 35, with an hour or two of pranayama, 100 micrograms of LSD, and just focusing on the intent to quit the next day. I didn't even remember that I was a smoker until late in the evening when I found my tobacco in my pocket. And research supports this. John Hopkins studies on psilocybin. The researchers said that oftentimes addictions can be cured with a single dose, and also other types of psychological issues with a single dose. Anyways, the point being that even though there's overlap, all of these things have specialties. Mescaline, for example, you still have visions, and they're sort of similar to LSD in certain ways, but there's definitely an extremely distinct aesthetic to the realms that all of these medicines bring you into. And the purpose of San Pedro is different from LSD. It's still about learning, but it tends to, at high doses, cause an experience of having a dialogue directly with the light. Oftentimes people see a sea of trillions of photons that represent monads or individual units of consciousness and will actually become one themselves. It's much more about masculine energies and light and certain types of information that are generally, you could file under the heading masculine, So it's a really interesting thing that all of these compounds, the patterns that you see when you take them are extremely similar, but not identical. So it poses a great riddle to me, because I've always felt like those patterns that you see wafting in the air actually do exist. And you're not hallucinating them, but you're perceiving them because your light filters are down a bit. But they do look a little bit different with all of these substances. So I think it speaks to the subjectivity of your perception, but the fact that it's still based on a fundamental reality, if that makes sense. It's the same and not the same. Anyways, very, very interesting. Also, the fact that everyone seems to see these things lends credence to the fact that they're real. But then how is it that they are slightly different depending on which compound you take? The answer could be that it is different wavelengths of this spectrum of light. So it's not that you're seeing the same pattern in a slightly different context. You're actually seeing a slightly different bandwidth of light that's normally invisible to you. That could be a reasonable explanation for this. Okay, so what I was saying, I guess originally, is that talking too much about drumming as a way, there's only so much to say about that. Repetitive sounds cause a trance, and combining different trance-inducing techniques at once deepens these things. Another way that the drum is used, though, that I think people think about less and is important, is that actually in certain songs and certain styles, certain lineages, you'll deliberately hold the drum so that your voice is behind it because when you hit the drum and your voice and your intention and your will is the vibration is in the drum, it amplifies and disperses it to a greater area. So that's another concept behind that you're actually generating more power for your will and your intention by singing into the drum and then exploding and dispersing that energy around the room. So we're going to talk about plants and sound healing. Well, let's talk about some of the things that I do that are not traditional. Quite a range of that, but they're all based on these older fundamental ideas of shamanism, right? Do I have them in here? No. I actually use tuning forks. I don't know if they have a special name, but that's, they're forks and you just bang them together and they poot. And when you have a strong dose of the medicine, you can click them together and you can watch how the energy around them interacts and how it's different. And it's difficult to explain because it's highly intuitive, but based on this, something in your subconscious knows which one's appropriate. And so ding, and then placed on either side of the head, and it brings the energetic body into a certain homeostasis with this particular pitch. And that particular pitch is basically a wavelength of consciousness that you have now attenuated this person's being to. So that's, it's still basically the same technique that ayahuasca taught me many years ago, where I'm making two pitches come out of my mouth at once in order to be out of phase and use that tension to draw the energy in the room into homeostasis. Another thing that bears mentioning, I think, is that if you go to the Ecuadorian Amazon, the Quechua always have mixtures of plants, and the name is always however many plants are in them. So you might have ocho plantas, and then once plantas, and up to 30 plants mixed together. And pretty much always there's some ayahuasca in these mixtures. Not enough to cause a trip, but because ayahuasca, maybe because it's a super good anti-inflammatory, but the shamanic way of thinking about it is that it opens up your being and aids in your receptivity so that the other plants that you consume are more effective. And the evidence that I've seen for this is pretty remarkable. Oftentimes plants that have little to no benefit for a person, when combined with ayahuasca, they will work magic, including sangre de drago. Sangre de drago is the blood of a tree. It looks just like blood. This brings us to the doctrine of similitude that we kind of spoke about earlier, where the appearance of a plant or an animal or anything that can be consumed is an indication of its use, right? There's a plant, I don't remember the name now, in the Ecuadorian Amazon, that the bark looks just like the skin of a Dos Equis, fertilance, the most venomous snake in South America, responsible for the most deaths. It is so venomous that I once saw a story about a girl that was bit on the leg in the city, so the hospital was not far, still had to have it amputated. If you get bit by the snake, you're almost definitely going to die if you're out in the jungle. And if not, you will almost 100% lose a limb. And so the bark of this tree, it's a very small tree, looks just like Dos Equis skin. And also the leaves that hang look like two snake heads. And this is the principal ingredient in the antidote for the Dos Equis bite that the Shuar use. No one knows what other plants are added because they keep it secret. Another one of those ubiquitous elements of shamanism, from the Eleusinian mysteries to South America's secrecy of all magicians, of all traditions. But they will not reveal what other plants it is. But it is accepted fact that if you're bitten by a fer-de-lance and the Shuar treat you instead of the hospital, you will not even lose a limb, much less die. And if you go to the hospital, 100% you're getting amputated. So this doctrine of similitude tells us an awful lot about stuff. There's a number of other ones that I'm not able to recall at the moment. You know, people say lion's mane looks like a brain, and it's good for the brain. This sort of ability to read the allegories of nature is another one of our greatest assets as plant medicine people. But I think really what I was talking about is just the fact that ayahuasca amplifies efficacy, and I was trying to remember. Oh yeah, sangre de drago. So sangre de drago looks like human blood, and it's actually been clinically studied. And the researchers said that they don't know how, but it aids the blood in rebuilding damaged tissue beyond scientific understanding. It is, shouldn't even be happening. It's that good. And I had a client that had already the sangre de drago, and he had epilepsy, and he would bite his lips. And he said the sores would take 7 days or longer to heal. And when he was drinking ayahuasca and using sangre de drago, the mouth sore healed in 2 days. And so the same individual, I gave ajo sacha, but also with ayahuasca. And even though withdrawal from his epilepsy medication that didn't stop him from having seizures either, should have caused more seizures, he had none instantly. I guess I don't have a control, but I can't imagine the ajo sacha would have worked that well by itself. And I could go on and on with examples of the amplified efficacy of giving these plants with ayahuasca as a helpmate. I don't know anything about drinking blood. That's not my gig. Okay, so just trying to take a second to think of what we've covered, because I am trying to make this into a couple of parts so that we have space for everything. I think earlier when I was talking about the chapaka or the suripanga cleansing with the limpieza, I did mention that the sound, you can hear why it would interact with the energy of ayahuasca when you drink ayahuasca. And then I guess it's worth noting also that there are other plants that are used just for their physical presence that actually seem to have some kind of efficacy without even being consumed. Copal is one of those things. But just in the terms of absorbing energy in the room, there are certain gourds and I don't know what they're called. There are plants here that are, it's just like a round, I don't have one. It's just a fruit. And when the seeds dry, it just makes a certain very distinctive sound. And kind of going off the topic of plants absorbing energy, just because it just made me think of this. But I once observed a shaman who would use different rattles for different purposes. And I'd never seen anyone do that before, but I instantly understood why. The relationship between these sounds and the effect that they have is obvious, in the ceremony. But it's not just that, according to the shamans, and this is wisdom, I think, that whatever function these plants have, the sound is an expression of what they are in their essence. So the presence of these plants that can make these sounds, it does the same thing to a lesser extent. Kind of like when a human is singing into a drum, and every time he hits it, the idea that it amplifies it and disperses. Another interesting aspect of this that these medicines open you up to, we've talked about increases in telepathy from consuming ayahuasca, or actually the most compelling instance of this that I ever experienced, and the first one that was really dramatic. My girlfriend had gone about a mile away up to the top of a mountain to listen to a fish show because she didn't have tickets. And I was still in the town, and I was going through something. And I had taken a small amount of mushrooms. It was only, a gram or less, probably less. And as I was walking up the street, a tear ran down my eye, and then I saw a Burmese mountain dog, and I petted it for a minute. And then I got to the car, and I couldn't get in. And previous to this, I had been having a conversation in my mind with a hypothetical person. And my girlfriend comes walking up after I'd been stuck at the car for 30 minutes or so, and she just instantly starts repeating every word of the conversation, this imaginary conversation between me and this other person, word for word. She mentioned the tear running down my face. She knew about the Burmese mountain dog, and she knew that I was trying to get into the car, and that she had the keys. So, there's no way that was chance, So, what I'm getting at is that this receptivity to thoughts and information that is enhanced by consuming these things is not limited to humans. And I'll get to one of the possible explanations for how this works in the mechanistic sense eventually. But the first time that I ever found an ayahuasca vine to harvest myself, I went out into the jungle, and I was about to go into the forest, and this voice in my head said, "You're going to waste your time. If you just go about 100 feet down the road and go into the forest, you will find the vine." And I just dismissed it. I thought, this is absolutely silly. It's just me thinking shit. And so I go out in the jungle and I walk and there's abundant ayahuasca in this area, which makes it weirder. I mean, it was easy to find everywhere else in the area. And so I walk for hours. It's starting to get dark. I have to go back. And I leave the jungle and I look and I see a creek, and ayahuasca has a preference for growing, near a water source because it grows so fast and it's so big. So I thought, well, maybe. So I go down to where that voice in my head told me, and I follow the little creek back, and I don't really see anything. But then I feel this pull to the right, and I go about 10 more feet over to the right, and there's this massive, 20-year-old huge red ayahuasca vine with shoots, different arms everywhere, and a bunch of babies because it had been there forever dropping seeds. So there's little vines all over the place. And so, the vine called me. And let's see, is it getting late? Yeah, it's getting late. So let's make a synopsis, I guess, before part two, when we're going to get more into the sort of spooky elements of this stuff. But I'm sure you guys can see that the theme here, really, is that the shaman is a person who has entered into a dialogue with the universal mind, a person who has learned to read the allegories of nature and extract the metaphors. It is a person who has managed to take the filters of their nervous system down or off and had gotten comfortable enough to be able to manage and remain focused, and to also be able to distinguish between genuine intuitions and precognitions and wish demons and just regular thinking. But overall, regardless of tradition, it is a person who is having a more holistic experience of the universal consciousness. And this is the reason that it's associated with healing on so many different levels. It's not just for physical illness, emotional traumas and psychological stuff. It doesn't matter what it is. The shaman, if he's truly a shaman, just receives this information, and if the answers are available, he will have them. But it's because of the holistic experience. They're experiencing more of the universe and able to filter and receive more of the information than our normal consciousness will allow. And that experience heals the shaman himself, because this exposure to the universal mind dissolves the influence of the negative ego. I don't like to talk about ego dissolution as a good idea. I think it needs the context of developing a healthy relationship with ego, but not necessarily to dissolve. And because of this holistic experience, he is able, because he has wholeness within him, he is able to have the effect of creating wholeness in others. Because nothing can cause an effect that it does not contain within itself. And so, kind of, loosely related to this, I mentioned earlier in the stream at the very beginning that there is evidence that entangled particles give rise to our consciousness. And if you think about the fact that entanglement is just another way of saying that everything is fundamentally connected. Entanglement is the mechanism that on the physical level, the mechanism that facilitates the oneness of all things. It is that connection. It is the oneness of all things that generates consciousness itself according to science at this moment. I hope I explained that well enough to make clear what I'm alluding to there. So the answer in regards to, what is a shaman and why, and what is the technique, how does it work? That fundamental thing is the crux of the apostrophe. And it actually does allow the shaman to have precognition. And this is very dangerous territory, because if you become overconfident in your ability to predict the future, you can cause a lot of havoc. And this is one of the most common snares, traps, mistakes that any type of magician makes, to think that his magic can do more for him than it can. You see some success at this, all your desires and wish fulfillment start driving you to convince yourself that anything you think is a precognition, anything you want to think. So, and then also advising other people based on, predictions about the future could get them into trouble if you're wrong, obviously, so it's a delicate area, but, and this is a big but, that connection with this greater mind exposes the being, the mind of the individual, to a greater bird's eye view of the patterns that are interlocking to create our reality, the symmetries, and the precognition on one level. I can actually use Maynard James Keenan from Tool to illustrate something he said to illustrate this. Fear Inoculum came out before COVID, and the title track is about a pandemic that divides people and causes them to be afraid of each other and whatnot. And he was asked, what the hell, man? Because that's not the first time that he's done something like that. And the interviewer asked him, and he said, it's just the subconscious maps patterns, and sometimes it can extend those patterns into the future. You don't really have to invoke woo to understand it. So partly I'm setting up the next part of the stream, because we're going to get more deeply into the sort of prophetical stuff that happens with shamans and other types of mystics. And, one of the reason that acceptance of this sort of phenomena is so poor is, I think, that the most famous examples of this kind of thing have some commercial element to them. They are mainstream, and we have a few, like Nostradamus, Edgar Cayce, a handful of people that define the perception of an entire phenomena, and I'm not saying that the subconscious mapping patterns is necessarily all there is to it, or even that having a holistic experience of consciousness where your perception is broader and therefore you can perceive more patterns and more layers of patterns, that's the only explanation for it. But with certainty, these medicines can give answers that are correct. And I am about to sign off, and I'm going to give just 2 examples of that sort of thing occurring before we get into part 2 in a couple of days, probably Wednesday. I want to remind everyone we have one more spot open for the entire month of September. November, we're doing the entire month in the Sacred Valley as well, but we're going to go morel hunting and other medicinal and edible mushroom foraging, but particularly morels. And then in May, we're going to be in Manu in the pristine jungle. And also, please hit the like button, share, subscribe. Consider becoming a patron where you get access to 6 years of premium content, including a lot of secret streams that are my favorite content of my own, for sure. So being a patron is awesome. We're demonetized, so I don't get anything from Facebook for my efforts. If you appreciate me, show it. And so the couple of examples of this sort of precognition stuff, I guess the first one that I can recall that is really compelling, other than the medicine telling me that my partner will have my babies well before we were ever involved, and the moment I saw her and all that, and it happened, might be able to dismiss that, I guess. But the next 2, I don't think you can dismiss. The first one that I'll relate, I had rented a property in Ecuador, and the owner turned out to be a very bad person. And that's not acceptable when you're trying to do plant medicine, to have that kind of energy around. So I had one client with me at the time, and he was actually a partner as well. So it was less of a client somehow, also a friend, I guess. But, he was intimately involved with everything that was happening there and knew all of the stuff. And we went out into the jungle and drank ayahuasca together. And I asked the medicine at one point, show me a way forward, because we have to move right away. I didn't have a ton of money. The indigenous had shut the country down, and a plane load of our guests had to be turned around and sent home. And so, we were pretty much going bankrupt because of this riot, basically, in Ecuador. Although I support the indigenous efforts 100%, it was not convenient for us. And so I'm asking the medicine, show me a way forward. And first it says, tell your friend this, that you'll see a serpent tomorrow at the house, and that will be your first clue that you should take me seriously when I tell you things like this in the future, And I said, okay. So I told my friend, we're going to see a serpent tomorrow at the house. And then she said, you will have your answer. The way forward will be clear within 48 hours. But I didn't get any information, right? So we go to the house. The next night, my partner yells, hey, you guys, come here. And I go outside, and there's some type of viper. It's a small one. And I just know that there's no reason not to pick it up for some reason. And I pick it up, and it's like running through my fingers. And the guest comes out, and he sees the serpent in my hand. And so, that was interesting. But then the next day, I go to Tena, and I'm walking around, And I realize I need agua florida, and I see a little shaman shop that I'd never been into before. So I go in, and there's this Quechua man, and he has this property with a maloca, and it's beautiful. There's a crystal clear river in the front yard. There's petroglyphs on boulders by the, I mean, it was absolutely, he had a pet coati and stuff there. It was absolutely perfect and remarkable. And I didn't have the money to rent this place. And he said, well, don't worry about it. Just give me a percentage and you guys can move in tomorrow. I talked to one person the next day, or 2 days. But 48 hours, within the 48 hours, and the chances that I would just find the exact perfect place and then not even have to pay anything to take possession of it, So that's one example where this seems undeniable. And then another one that is even more convincing, maybe. I had just smoked DMT, and as the vision was closing, a mantis stuck its head out of the cloud and said, by the way, this person just sent you $1,000. And the cloud of vision disappeared and my phone beeped. And I opened it up and it was the person named and it was the amount named. And I had not sent out any distress calls. I had not asked for help. There was no reason. She'd never done it before. So like I said, that's just a teaser for the next stream. We're going to get into the deep weirdness of shamanism and the kind of things that happen with, occult type phenomena, I guess, in the next part. So if anyone has any questions for me in the next couple of minutes before I sign off, I'll be happy to answer them. I do have quite a lag, so it might take me a minute or two to answer. Going once, going twice. Also running through my mind if there's anything really fundamentally important about the sound and the way that it's used and the plants. But I really think we probably covered that all fairly well. And I wasn't my intention to go into the applications of specific, no, I'm definitely not vegan. I'm not vegan at all. To go into the specifics of what plants to use for what and all that, I only wanted to talk about how these plants connect us with these apparent superpowers that allow us to, determine what plants people need and what dietary changes and what weird psychological stuff they might be able to do. Like my teacher telling me to go find a woman and breastfeed, and me thinking he's completely lost his mind until it hit me that I wasn't breastfed. That kind of craziness. Okay, so we have a question, but it doesn't look like it's necessarily related much to shamanism. Off topic, but tips for a best man speech in 4 days. Sincerity, no matter what. And I'm assuming that the reason you're asking this is that you probably want to say something that won't be taken well. And if that's the case, it's difficult to advise someone else, because I would always opt for unfiltered sincerity. But that may cost you a friend. What would be the best healing journey for backs and bones, please? Red Ortiga, it depends on the type of bone problem. But coca also provides a tremendous amount of calcium as far as plants go. And it's used for osteoporosis and whatnot down here. And then Red Ortiga, I think, is more for pain management of like aching bones. But I mean, if you have a bent back or something, you need a chiropractor. And, the general rule of thumb is that any plant that addresses inflammation is going to make pretty much any condition better. People say the root of all illness is inflammation. That's not true. But it's definitely a major factor, and it's a major factor in suffering. So if you have a painful condition, or you have a digestive condition, or you have anything, you shouldn't be eating processed food or processed sugar anyways, but especially white sugar. A little bit of panela may not harm you, but white sugar is out. Alcohol is out. Anything that causes inflammation, avoid it. And if you go carnivore for just maybe 4 weeks, and then resume a normal diet, that also massively reduces a lot of inflammation, types of inflammation in the body, particularly in the internal organs. And yeah, so dietary changes combined with anti-inflammatory plants. Also, there's a blue-green algae that I sell in dried form that you can look up. It has the amino acids that are needed for cells to rebuild themselves, and 3 different types of protein that is highly digestible and forms of protein, and there's more of it per gram than meat, higher percentage than meat of protein. And also all sorts of anti-inflammatories and things that will benefit you, So I can actually tell you from a patient that was just here, a client. She is having radiation pills. She's in remission from cancer, but still in treatment. And so she had terrible inflammation in her thumb. It was swollen and red. And in her feet. And after a couple of days of chewing coca all day and just the general protocol, ayahuasca as well, that inflammation reduced almost to zero, almost instantly. So, and also kushuru, lots of kushuru is feeding her. Yeah, shoot me an email if you would like to set up a consultation, and I can provide some medicines. Okay, let me check the other chat for questions, and if there's nothing, then I will leave you. To your own devices, but I want to mention that I made contact with a Matses healer. The Matses are the originators of Kambo, and they were only contacted recently, I think 1989 or something, and they almost never leave the jungle. His Spanish isn't much better than mine. To put in perspective, how indigenous this guy is, how removed from the outside world. And we are going to drink Sananga together in a few days, which is interesting to me. I don't know what it does. I don't know why you drink it. I've heard of Shipibo doing this. Most of you guys probably are aware of Sananga's eye drops, and it's remarkable, especially the first time you take it. It loosens energetic blocks, and for me, it felt like a divine energy bath from the inside. Incredibly cleansing feeling, and also the visions get really, really intense and really, really clear immediately after the application. So my logic here is that if it dissolves what the Quechua call panema, as well as I experienced drinking it, should do the same thing, only on a whole new level. So look forward to that video. Also, the combo video of him doing giving a combo ceremony in the traditional way will be up in a couple of days. He will also be here in September, and he's also willing to teach. So if you come to the September retreat, you could have the opportunity to acquire a new skill directly from the original lineage of combo healers. So that is pretty amazing. I feel very lucky and honored to happen to have connected with him, because there aren't a lot of Matses. And, I'm always really determined to try to find the remnants of the unpolluted lineages that still exist in plant medicine and other traditions. And it's increasingly difficult. It's not entirely bad, because syncretism is good. And all of these healers to have access to all of the tools and all of the plants from every tradition makes sense. But of course, there is also the corollary damage, of things getting obscured and lost and confused. So while it's still possible, I got really lucky also with rape a little while back and was able to learn from a Huni Kuin Pahe, who it is said his lineage are the original rape makers. And so I felt really lucky to be able to learn in that context. And now we have the Matsi's combo practitioner and also the drinking of Sananga, which I have no idea what is going to happen. And like I said, his Spanish isn't very good. Yeah, I'm in Peru, but in the Sacred Valley, not in Iquitos anymore. It's difficult to get answers from him because his Spanish isn't great. So when my partner is here, she speaks better Spanish, so she can figure out ways to get more sophisticated dialogue going. But it's pretty crazy. He didn't know the word in Spanish for mountain. He was pointing at a mountain and saying, "This thing, can ¿qué es la palabra?" Like, what do you mean? And I'm looking for something I would need to identify, and I realized, you mean the montaña? And he's like, "Oh yeah, thanks." So also just watching him in town, it's his first time seeing like towns, and he's like he's been transported from another planet or something. He's in awe of everything. It's pretty remarkable. Also a very sweet and gentle man. Oh, you're in Urubamba? Nice, right on. Yeah, I'm in town right next to Urubamba at the moment, actually. So if you want, hit me up and we can have coffee or something. How long is the retreat? Any amount of time. I never recommend that anyone come for less than 3 days. Usually 10 days is sufficient for most people. But 30 days is like if you really feel like you need some deep transformation, or if you have physical health problems that need to be addressed, it's 30 days is good. And we are doing expeditions to ruins like the Temple of the Sun, which was the most important Incan holy place. And I've gotten really interesting information from some of the local shamans there about using pieces of meteorites to manipulate electromagnetic fields during ceremony, which is hugely meaningful for me because of the place I was coming from when I intersected with this knowledge, I guess. And we also have a traditional Quechua shaman that is doing tours of Sacsayhuaman, which is a remarkable ruin site as well. And yeah, having lots of guests like the Matsi's gentleman, Carlos, and Huni Kuin people, different pies, depending on when it is, because they don't live here, they're just passing through. Including one group of sisters, it's 3 sisters, and in the Huni Kuin tradition, men are the only shamans, and women apparently have always still played that role and very effectively, but they're not acknowledged as pahe or pajeros. And so these 3 sisters are part of the first generation of Huni Kuin women to decide that they are going to be recognized as pahe. So if you're interested in attending one of the events, you can email me at mountainosis@gmail.com. If it's going to be September, hurry up, because I have to know how many people for sure we're going to have in the next 4 days or so, and then I just have to close booking. Otherwise, November with the morel hunts is available, and then May in the jungle. So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. I hope you got some value from this talk. And, it's a delicate balance for people who don't live in South America, or, don't have someone that can initiate them into the mysteries, or don't have thousands of dollars to spend, and to kind of feel like you are disqualified from experiencing these medicines and even becoming a shaman yourself. One thing that I would warn about is that, at the risk of sounding what is it, exclusivity clause or something? One of the major problems, I think, with the popularity of plant medicine is that there are a lot of institutions and whatnot and individuals that have sprung up that say they will teach you to become a shaman if you just pay them some amount of money and do something for a certain amount of time. And I don't think that's how it works. I think this is something that begins the moment you're born, maybe even in another life. And if you have not lived with this dialogue with the universal mind, building in complexity and clarity, since you can remember, I don't know that it's meant for everyone. Having said that, however, I do think that becoming your own shaman to a personal extent is absolutely integral. And an overwhelmingly high percentage of the problems in our world come from the fact that people don't realize they have divine sovereignty. They don't realize that the individual will is equal to that of the Most High God, assuming there is one, that we are all fragments of one consciousness and therefore all on an equal playing field in terms of the sovereignty of our will. And so this crisis of purpose and the resulting tendency to follow systems created by the founders of religion and political systems and whatnot, this crisis of purpose is exploited by the dominators, the overlords, and it's encouraged. And so, for me, really the fundamental purpose of this kind of work is to identify, clarify, and embody your true will, your highest purpose, the highest expression of yourself, and to discover that purpose and how it is in alignment with a greater purpose, because that's actually the underlying natural state of everything in the universe. Everything has some kind of function, or else it wouldn't exist. The law of necessity, they call it in the mystery tradition, means that everything that is because it's absolutely necessary. And so it is only because of the efforts of people with selfish interests that humanity has been derailed into this crisis of purpose, because people without their own compass set, it can be set for them, So I'm basically just wishing everyone luck and success, encouraging caution without fear, in developing this stuff for yourself. And one of the most important bits of advice I think actually that I could give for those people that have to do this work on their own is that if you do not play an instrument, you need to learn one. And it helps if it's an instrument that requires you to do different things with each hand, right? To be ambidextrous to some extent, because then the mind is engaged with melody, harmony, rhythm, all simultaneously, and you're making a physical expression of all of these things with different parts of your brain. And to improvise in these states, you have to develop enough proficiency to improvise on the instrument and to get into flow state. That is the most important developmental strategy that you will ever find. Also, drink lots of colloidal gold to get your brain health up. Chanting, worship roast one. About the retreat and one at a time, we just did have a guest that was here privately. I do that, and for some people it's necessary. If your trauma is so bad that you might not be able to restrain from screaming and babbling and, or just crying constantly, and maybe even it didn't bother the other guest, but it's going to bother you to think you're bothering them kind of stuff. Sometimes that's more appropriate. And in terms of doing my job as a healer to help you, the more we can interact, the better of a job I can do. So, in that sense, it is actually much better to have one-on-one sessions. But I'll never have more than 10 people. That's the cutoff line. And usually we end up with, 3 to 6, depending on what time of year it is. So, yeah, there's small groups, and I know almost everyone. This time we only have one person coming that hasn't been here before. And I spend a lot of time talking to people on video before they come so that I have a very clear idea of who I'm dealing with. And I also don't do any advertising outside of the channel, because that way I know that we have like-minded people because they're all watching these videos. And I think that really helps for the cohesion. I honestly do not like the idea of strangers getting together and drinking ayahuasca, because how you're so open to influences and absorbing energies, and being with 30, 100. I've even heard of ceremonies with 300 people, and I don't care who the shaman is. This one I heard 300 people, one shaman and a couple of facilitators not trained as shaman, and so this shaman is supposed to transmutate the energy of 300 people. They would die. So it tells you the shaman's not real. And there's 300 people. So point being, these large groups of strangers is not advisable. Chanting sessions, I mostly use, songs much more than chants. Some of them, like the Todo Cura, Todo Sana, is kind of a chant, I guess. Todo cura, todo sana, todo tiene medicina dentro. But you could call them icaros, but the Shuar style ayahuasca songs, I guess, are very difficult, if not impossible, to do properly without drinking the medicine. It's just, you have to be plugged in. And I've considered actually drinking ayahuasca and then doing a stream before. But it's difficult because it tends to send me to the toilet a lot. So there might be a lot of empty, video. But yeah, I've considered that because it is really remarkable. Maybe even to do a contrast where I'll post without drinking medicine and then what it sounds like when you do drink medicine. Because these alien sounds, of anything I've ever heard, they make the best case for, legitimately channeled language from another dimension. You can't imagine that it's anything but that when it's really, really happening. So anyways, you guys, I've gone on much longer than I had expected. I appreciate each and every one of you. Please become a patron and support the channel. If you're wanting to come to September, you have only a few days to book, and then November and May. And then also, don't forget that I do consultations for various applications, guitar lessons, whatever. So if you think you can use any of my insider services, that's another way that you can support the channel. And the combo video will be out on Wednesday. One other thing I wanted to mention about combo, actually I'm hesitant to say this because I don't know if the algorithm am I allowed to say research has suggested without worrying about risk of it being called medical misinformation? I won't be specific. How about that? I just had a 4-year-old video taken down the other day, so they're really they're going back through the entire history and auditing stuff, and it's really crazy. So it makes me nervous to even tell you guys the truth about medicine. Let's just say that research has suggested some very remarkable stuff that combo can do in regards to terminal diseases not being terminal anymore. So look that up. Maybe Google, combo and HIV or combo and cancer. And I'm not saying anything about it. All I'm saying is that if you Google those things, you might see stuff. Mighty algorithm, please do not execute my channel for sharing this. Thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. Like, share, subscribe, please, and I'll see some of you physically and in person shortly, and the rest of you I'll see online in a couple days. Aho.